Welcome back to the Deep Dive. It is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. And I have to be honest with you right off the top here. Today feels heavy.
Yeah, it really does.
You know those days where you look at the news or you're scrolling through your feed and it doesn't just feel like stuff happening?
Right.
It feels like the atmosphere itself has changed. Like the entire world is just holding its breath. That is exactly where we are right now.
It's one of those rare moments in history where you have, 3 or 4 massive gears that usually turn independently, all turning at the exact same time. And right now, they're grinding against each other. You can almost hear the metal shrieking.
Exactly. And our mission today for this deep dive is to try and listen to that grinding noise and figure out what part of the machine is about to break. Because, looking at the stack of sources on the desk today, it is frankly overwhelming.
It's a lot.
We've got military reports on naval movements that look like something out of a Tom Clancy novel. We have legal analysis of a Supreme Court ruling that literally just upended the entire U.S. trade policy about 4 days ago. We have diplomatic cables about a complete freeze with France, of all places. And then intelligence on Russian arms deals on top of all that.
It is a total convergence of crises. That's really the only way to put it. Usually you deal with a trade war or you deal with a diplomatic spat or a military buildup.
Right, one at a time.
Exactly. To have all three peaking within the same, 96-hour window, that is unprecedented.
And usually on this show, we try to pick one topic and really drill down. But today, we just can't do that.
Yeah.
We have to connect them. We have U.S. aircraft carriers moving. We have a 10-day deadline coming from the White House. And we have a trade war that mutated into something completely different overnight.
Yeah.
So the question we are asking you today is, how do all these things connect? Is there a unified theory for this chaos?
And the answer is pretty uncomfortable. It suggests a world where the old alliances, the safety nets we've relied on since 1945, are fracturing. And the new lines are being drawn not by ideology, not by democracy versus autocracy, but by pure survival.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to start with the loudest noise in the room, which is the Middle East.
Definitely.
We are looking at a potential new war. And I feel like we've been hearing war with Iran rumors for 20 years, but this feels very different. What is the immediate situation report regarding the U.S. and Iran right now?
It is critical. If you have been following the headlines since January 13th, tensions have been ratcheting up. But what we are seeing right now in just the last 48 to 72 hours is a hard shift from tension to pre-deployment.
Pre-deployment. Okay, what sparked this latest jump? Because, tension is basically the baseline for U.S.-Iran relations. What made the needle jump into the red zone this week?
It's the ultimatum. President Trump, speaking at a meeting of the Board of Peace in Washington just recently, stated explicitly that he is prepared to decide on attacking Iran within the next 10 days.
10 days? That is incredibly specific.
It is. Usually politicians say things like, all options are on the table, or we will respond at a time of our choosing.
Right, that vague diplomatic speak.
Exactly. But 10 days, he said, and I'm quoting the reports here, you're going to be finding out over the next probably 10 days. That puts a literal ticking clock on this crisis. And this isn't just rhetoric. The hardware is moving to back it up.
Because when a president gives a timeline like that, the military logistics machine has to synchronize with it.
Exactly. They have to be ready to execute on day 10 if the order comes down.
Right. And I saw the phrase massive armada trending on Truth Social. It sounds like hyperbole, but looking at the naval tracking data in our packet, it's not, is it?
No, that was the president's phrasing on Truth Social, but the Navy is actually delivering on the adjective.
Yeah.
When you look at the tracking data, he is not exaggerating. We already had the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 in the region.
And that arrived late last month.
Right. Correct. But now the USS Gerald R Ford has been dispatched as well.
Now, the Ford is the newest, biggest class of carrier we have, right? Why does that specific ship matter compared to the Lincoln?
The Ford isn't just another carrier. It is the lead ship of an entirely new class. It uses electromagnetic catapults instead of the old steam ones, meaning it can launch planes much faster, about 25% more sorties per day than the older Nimitz class like the Lincoln.
Wow, 25% more. That's huge.
It's massive. It's the most advanced, most lethal airfield at sea anywhere in the world. It was actually conducting operations down in the Caribbean, part of Operation Southern Spear, basically shaking down its systems close to home. And on February 14th, it was abruptly diverted.
Diverted from the Caribbean all the way to the Middle East. That is a very long steam.
Yeah, it is. And it's being done with extreme urgency. It is steaming toward the Middle East right now with Carrier Strike Group 12. So you have two full carrier strike groups converging in one spot.
And a strike group isn't just the carrier.
No, not at all. That implies hundreds of aircraft, guided missile destroyers, cruisers. It is a force projection package designed to overwhelm a nation-state. This isn't just to hunt a few terrorists in the desert.
But it's not just the boats either. I was reading the section on air power in our source packet, and the location Lajes Field kept popping up.
This is the detail that really convinces me this is real. We have reports of significant U.S. aircraft positioning at Lajes Field.
Lajes Field, remind me, that's in the Azores, right?
Yeah.
In Portugal.
Correct. It's a mid-Atlantic archipelago. Lajes is a critical logistics hub. They call it the lily pad.
The lily pad. I like that.
Right, because most fighter jets and heavy transports simply cannot fly from the U.S. East Coast all the way to the Middle East in one hop without massive continuous tanker support. It's too far. They stop at Lajes.
So it's the gas station on the highway.
Exactly. When you see heavy transport aircraft and strategic assets parking in the Azores, it signals a bridge is being built between the U.S. mainland and the Middle East. It's a sign of absolute readiness for sustained operations. They are moving all the pieces into place for something very big.
Okay, so the gun is being cocked, the logistics are moving, but why now? I mean, like we said, U.S.-Iran tensions are a tale as old as time.
Yeah.
What are the specific trigger points pushing this over the edge here in February 2026?
It's really a perfect storm of three things converging. First, you have the internal situation inside Iran. We are looking at massive anti-government protests. European intelligence is actually citing numbers as high as 40 million protesters.
Wait, 40 million? That's almost half the country.
It is a staggering number. It suggests the regime has lost the street entirely. And the regime is cracking down brutally, mass detentions, a rising death toll. The argument from the White House is that a crumbling regime is the most dangerous kind of regime because they become totally unpredictable.
They might start a war just to rally the flag, basically.
Exactly. Give the people an external enemy to focus on.
Which brings us to the second point, I assume. The nukes.
Right. The nuclear program. Negotiations have completely stalled out. The U.S. has laid out a very specific, uncompromising list of demands.
What's on the list?
They want the transfer of the remaining 400 kilograms of enriched uranium out of the country. They want a total halt on weapons development, heavy restrictions on ballistic missiles, and an absolute end to the support for proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis.
And I'm assuming Tehran isn't just saying, oh, okay, sure, here you go.
Far from it. That list is basically a demand for unconditional surrender of their foreign policy. And this is the third factor, the psychological warfare aspect. Iranian officials, including Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, are publicly dismissing the U.S. threats as just psychological warfare.
But they're also making their own threats.
Yes. At the exact same time, they are claiming readiness to sink U.S. warships. So they are cornered, and that makes them highly volatile.
Now, I want to touch on something really weird that popped up in the sources. There was this rumor circulating about the U.S. military leadership. Something about General Kane.
Right, General Daniel Kane. He is the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This was a fascinating moment of information warfare this week. There were reports swirling in the media that he was actively opposing the strike.
Opposing the president.
Yes. The rumor was that he was telling the president it was a bad idea, too risky, maybe even pushing back on the logistics of that 10-day window.
Which would be a huge deal. If the top general in the military is saying, don't do this, that changes the whole picture.
Exactly. It would signal a really deep rift in the chain of command right before a major conflict. But President Trump took to Truth Social to shut that down immediately.
What did he say?
He called those reports 100% incorrect and labeled them fake news. He asserted that the military leadership is completely aligned with the administration's strategy.
It feels like there's a lot of fog of war here. And the war hasn't even started yet. Just trying to figure out who is actually on board and who isn't.
And that is very typical in this pre-conflict phase. Both sides are trying to project total unity while actively testing the other side's resolve. The White House absolutely cannot afford to look like it has cold feet right now.
So you have the U.S. bringing overwhelming firepower, 2 carrier strike groups, the most advanced military on Earth. On paper, this looks like an incredibly lopsided fight. But here's where it gets really interesting to me. I was reading this report from the Asia Times in our packet about a secret deal.
Ah, yes. This is the asymmetric twist to the whole scenario.
Right. Because if you are Iran and you see the USS Gerald R. Ford coming at you, you know you can't win a dogfight with F-35s. You just can't. So what do you do?
You change the definition of winning. Iran isn't trying to defeat the U.S. military in a traditional head-to-head battle. They are trying to survive. And to do that, they have completely shifted their strategy. The Asia Times report highlights a secret deal that was signed back in December 2025 with Russia.
Okay, what was the deal for?
$591 million for Verba MANPADS.
MANPADS. Okay, let's break that down for the listener. Those are man-portable air defense systems, right?
Exactly. Shoulder-fired surface-to-air missiles.
Okay, so we're talking about guys on rooftops with tubes. Why does a $500 million investment in shoulder-fired missiles matter when the U.S. is bringing stealth bombers and carrier strike groups?
Because of what happened in 2025, remember, in the previous escalations, the U.S. and Israel effectively destroyed Iran's big fixed air defense sites. The S-300.
Right, the big radar dishes and massive missile tubes.
Yes. Those systems are incredibly capable, but they are easy targets for a modern Air Force. They emit huge radar signals, they light up like a Christmas tree on electronic warfare sensors, and they get wiped out in the first hour of a conflict by anti-radiation missiles.
So they are sitting ducks for the U.S.
Exactly. But a Verba missile, it's completely different. It's infrared guided, it homes in on heat, it doesn't use radar at all. It doesn't emit a signal that a U.S. jet can easily track from a distance. A single soldier can hide under a tarp on a rooftop or in an alleyway, wait for a target pop up, and fire.
And what can these Verbas actually hit? Because they aren't taking down a high-altitude bomber, right?
No, they have a 6-kilometer range and about a 4.5-kilometer ceiling. They aren't going to hit a B-2 bomber flying at 50,000 feet, but that is not the point of having them. The point is to threaten the low and slow assets.
Ah, helicopters?
Helicopters, drones, low-flying aircraft that are coming in to support special operations forces on the ground.
I see. So if the U.S. plans to send in special ops to secure those nuclear sites, or if they need to send in search and rescue teams for a downed pilot.
They have to fly low. And if Iran can use these Russian missiles to shoot down a Chinook or a Black Hawk, think of a Black Hawk down scenario in Mogadishu, and they manage to capture U.S. personnel, suddenly the entire dynamic of the war changes.
They gain a massive bargaining chip.
Exactly. They make the occupation or the tactical operation incredibly bloody and expensive. It is about raising the cost of intervention so high that the U.S. public just loses its stomach for the fight.
It's the porcupine strategy. You don't have to kill the bear, you just have to be way too painful to eat.
Precisely. It turns the conflict from a sterile, high-altitude air war into a really messy, dangerous ground slog.
But let's look at the seller here, Russia. We know Russia and Iran are close, but Russia is incredibly busy right now. We're entering the 4th year of the war in Ukraine. They are desperate for equipment themselves. Why on earth are they sending pristine high-tech missiles to Iran when they need everything they can get for their own front lines?
That is the really fascinating geopolitical why of this whole thing. The Asia Times analysis points out that this isn't charity. It's not just helping a buddy out. It's existential for Russia, too. It is all about the INSTC.
The INSTC. Okay, let's unpack that acronym. What is it?
It stands for the International North-South Transport Corridor.
And what does that corridor actually do?
It's a massive trade route. Think of it as a sanctions evasion superhighway. It runs from Russia, down through the Caspian Sea, straight into Iran, and then out to the Persian Gulf.
So it completely bypasses Europe, and it bypasses the Suez Canal.
Exactly. It bypasses all the Western-controlled choke points. Look, Russia is heavily sanctioned. They desperately need to get their oil, their grain, their goods out to Asian markets like India, and they need to import electronics and machine tools to keep their war machine running. Iran is the gatekeeper of that entire route.
So if the U.S. goes in and actually topples the Iranian regime,
Russia loses its back door. Russia loses its absolute critical economic lifeline. If a pro-American government, or honestly even just a chaotic failed state, replaces the Ayatollahs, that corridor shuts down. The trucks stop moving.
wow. So when Russia sends a $500 million in Verba missiles, they aren't just protecting an ally. They are literally protecting their own economy.
It's pure survival.
Yeah.
Russia needs Iran to stay stable enough to keep the trains moving. That's it.
That is wild. It's not just this ideological axis of evil stuff. It is cold, hard logistics and economics.
Always is.
So we had the U.S. moving in. Iran is digging in with this new Russian tech. You would expect, traditionally speaking, that in a moment like this, heading into a major conflict, the U.S. would be locking arms with its oldest allies. The U.K., France, we would be seeing a coalition forming.
You would certainly expect that based on the last 80 years of history. But if you look at the sources from the last 48 hours, the exact opposite is happening. The Western alliance is actively fracturing in real time.
Let's talk about the UK first. The
Mhm.
special relationship. Usually if the U.S. says we're going, the UK just asks what time.
Oh.
But that is not happening regarding the air bases right now.
No, it's not. This is a very significant rift. President Trump specifically wanted to use British bases for this potential Iran operation. He requested RAF Fairford in the UK and, crucially, Diego Garcia.
Diego Garcia. That's the island in the Indian Ocean, right? It's British territory, but it functions as a massive U.S. base.
Correct. It is essentially the unsinkable aircraft carrier of the Indian Ocean. It is absolutely vital for long-range bombers operating in the Middle East, like B-52s or B-2 stealth bombers,
Yeah.
because it allows them to strike without relying on host nations in the Gulf that might suddenly get cold feet. And the UK government has blocked the request.
Wait, they just said no.
They formally denied the request.
Denying access to Diego Garcia for a major U.S. operation, that feels totally unprecedented.
It's incredibly rare for an operation of this magnitude. It signals very clearly that the UK government does not agree with the strategic wisdom of this strike, and the reaction from the White House was swift, and it was punitive.
What did they do?
In direct response to the denial, Trump withdrew U.S. support for a deal regarding the Chagos Islands.
The Chagos Islands, that's the archipelago where Diego Garcia is actually located, right?
Exactly. There was a long-standing diplomatic deal in the works to hand sovereignty of the islands over to Mauritius while still keeping the military base secure. Trump pulling U.S. support from that deal is a direct diplomatic retaliation.
It's a tit for tat.
It is a tit-for-tat with our closest military ally, right on the eve of a potential war.
So the UK is effectively saying, we don't want to be part of this strike. And the U.S. is responding by saying, fine, then we are going to mess up your complex diplomatic deals.
Essentially, yes. And practically speaking, it complicates the U.S. military logistics immensely. If you can't fly bombers out of Diego Garcia, you have to fly them from much further away, or you have to rely even more heavily on those carrier strike groups we talked about. It stretches the supply lines thin.
And if that wasn't enough drama with our allies, we really have to talk about France.
Yeah.
Because this story coming out of Paris, I mean, it feels deeply personal. It feels like high school drama, but played out by nuclear power.
It is deeply personal. We have a total diplomatic freeze between the French government and the U.S. ambassador.
And the U.S. ambassador to France right now is Charles Kushner, right? Jared Kushner's father.
That's right. And the French foreign minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, has actually gone on the record declaring that French ministers will no longer meet with him. He is effectively persona non grata in the French ministries.
How does that even happen? How do you get locked out of the French government as the U.S. ambassador?
Well, it started with a tweet, or a post on X, I should say. There was a really tragic incident recently in Lyon. A 23-year-old student named Quentin Durang, who is described in the reports as a nationalist, was killed in a street fight between far-right and far-left political groups.
A terrible domestic tragedy.
A domestic tragedy, exactly. But then the U.S. State Department's Counterterrorism Bureau tweeted that violent radical leftism was to blame for his death and that it demonstrates a severe threat to public safety. And then the U.S. Embassy in Paris reposted that statement in French.
Okay, I can definitely see why the French government might not appreciate that. It sounds like the U.S. is heavily weighing in on their internal politics.
Exactly. They viewed it as gross interference in a highly sensitive domestic political matter. It looked like the U.S. was officially taking sides in a French political street fight. So, following standard diplomatic protocol, they summoned Ambassador Kushner to the foreign ministry to explain the tweet.
And a summons is a serious thing in diplomacy. You are supposed to show up and basically take your yelling.
Correct. It's a formal dressing down. But Charles Kushner didn't show up.
He ghosted the French foreign ministry.
He ghosted them. He sent a subordinate in his place. He sent a lower-level official to take the meeting. And in the very formal world of diplomacy, that is a massive snub. It is a profound sign of disrespect. It basically says, you are not important enough for me to clear my schedule.
So the tweet was the spark, but the snub was the explosion.
Exactly. Minister Bart said it flew in the face of diplomatic protocol. And the consequence of that is severe. Until Kushner explains himself personally to the ministry, he has zero high-level access. Imagine trying to coordinate a global response to an impending war in Iran or negotiate trade policy when your ambassador literally cannot get a meeting with the French government.
It's stunning. We have the UK actively blocking access to air bases. France is blocking our ambassador. The U.S. is moving toward this Middle East conflict in a state of isolation that we really haven't seen in modern history.
It highlights the America First approach in its most literal, stark sense. The U.S. is acting entirely on its own timeline with its own objectives, and the traditional allies are recoiling.
And speaking of America First and going it alone, we have to pivot to the economy, because while the carriers are steaming toward the Gulf, something arguably just as explosive happened back in Washington this week.
The Supreme Court ruling.
February 20th, 2026. A date that I think trade lawyers and economists are going to remember for a very long time.
Absolutely. This is where constitutional law crashes directly into your wallet. The Supreme Court ruled that the IEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, does not permit the president to impose tariffs.
Okay, let's pause and explain IEPA for the listener, because it's a mouthful. This has been the favorite tool for presidents to slap sanctions and tariffs on countries for a long time. Right?
For decades. It's a very broad emergency power granted by Congress. Presidents have historically used it to say there is a national emergency regarding this country or this issue, so I'm putting a tariff on this good or I'm blocking trade over here.
Yeah.
The Trump administration had used it quite heavily to put tariffs on countries related to fentanyl trafficking and also for reciprocal tariffs.
And the Supreme Court just looked at that and said, nope, you actually can't do that.
They said the text of the law does not grant that specific power for tariffs. It was an absolute thunderbolt. Overnight, those existing tariffs were completely invalidated.
So just massive chaos in the markets.
Total chaos for importers. You have FedEx, literally FedEx, already suing the U.S. government. They're demanding immediate refunds. You have importers scrambling everywhere. If your company paid millions of dollars in tariffs under IEPA and the highest court just said those tariffs were illegal, you want your money back right now.
And I'm assuming the government isn't just writing refund checks with an apology note.
Definitely not. President Trump stated that refunds will be litigated, meaning if you want your money, sue us. It is going to be an absolute mess in the Court of International Trade for years to come.
But here is the real aha moment in the source material. The tariffs didn't actually disappear, did they? The administration didn't just throw their hands up and say, oh, well, free trade for everyone.
Not for a single second. This is the pivot. The Supreme Court ruling happened on February 20th. By today, February 24th, we already have a brand new tariff regime in place. The administration just dusted off a completely different law, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974.
1974. Wow, deep cuts. What does Section 122 actually do?
It allows the president to impose tariffs to deal with balance of payments deficits. Basically, if the U.S. is sending out too much money to other countries and not bringing enough in, the president can slap a tariff on imports to balance the scales. It doesn't require a national emergency in the national security sense like IEPA did. It just requires a financial deficit.
So they basically just swapped out the national emergency justification for the balance of payments justification.
Exactly. A legal find and replace. And the result of that swap is a 15% tariff on practically all imports effective today.
Wait, 15% on everything coming in?
Almost everything. It is a massive blanket tariff. But, and this is a key detail, it is temporary by law. Section 122 is strictly limited to 150 days. It automatically expires on July 24, 2026, unless Congress explicitly votes to extend it.
So we basically have a guaranteed 5-month global trade war.
A 5-month, 15% shock to the entire global system.
But you said almost everything. There are exemptions, right? Because I imagine if we actually taxed everything coming into the country, the economy would just grind to a complete halt.
Right, there are carve-outs. And the exemptions list tells you exactly what the U.S. actually needs to survive. Critical minerals are exempt, pharmaceuticals, energy imports. You don't tax the raw materials that keep the lights on and the hospitals running.
What about our immediate neighbors, Mexico and Canada?
This is the really smart geopolitical move in the policy. USMCA members Mexico and Canada are fully exempt from the 15%.
Well, that makes sense. You really don't want to blow up your own integrated supply chain in North America while you're simultaneously preparing for war with Iran and arguing with Europe.
Exactly. It consolidates this Fortress North America idea. We will trade freely with our immediate neighbors, but everyone else across the oceans pays the toll. But for everyone else, it is incredibly painful. And the international blowback was instant. The EU Parliament immediately froze all work on approving the pending EU-US trade deal.
So let's recap this. France isn't talking to us. The EU is refusing to sign trade deals with us. The UK isn't letting us use their military bases. And our goods are 15% more expensive for the rest of the world.
It is a profound level of isolation. We are seeing a U.S. that is engaging the rest of the world purely on transactional, aggressive terms, and the rest of the world is reacting exactly how you'd expect by putting up walls.
It is a massive amount to take in. And frankly, with all this noise regarding Iran and the tariffs, it is very easy to miss the other headlines in our packet. But we have to do a quick whip around to the other fronts because the world didn't stop turning just because of this crisis.
No, it didn't. And some of these smaller stories provide really critical context for the global mood. Look at Mexico, for example.
Right. El Mencho.
Yes, Nemesio Seguera Cervantes, known as El Mencho, the absolute top leader of the CJNG cartel. Reports confirm he was killed.
That's a massive blow to the cartels. He was practically a ghost for years.
It is a huge operational blow, but in the short term, taking out the kingpin always creates a violent power vacuum. Violence is spiking dramatically right now. Mexican President Sheinbaum actually had to suspend flights and university classes in certain heavily contested areas. When the leader falls, the lieutenants immediately go to war with each other for the throne.
And the Mexican president made a point to clarify the U.S. involvement, right?
Yes. She was very careful to publicly state that the U.S. only provided intelligence and did not pull the trigger or conduct the operation on Mexican soil.
Trying to avoid that U.S. intervention narrative down there, especially right now.
Precisely. It's a very sensitive line to walk. Then, if you look over at Ukraine, we are officially entering the 4th year of that war. And the World Bank just released a brand new estimate for what reconstruction is going to cost. $588 billion.
Over $500 billion.
Yeah, it's an almost unimaginable sum of money. It shows that even if the shooting miraculously stops tomorrow, the economic scar on that region is going to be there for generations. And honestly, it further explains why Russia is so utterly desperate to keep that INSTC trade route through Iran open. They cannot afford to lose a single ruble of revenue with those kinds of costs looming.
Everything connects back. And briefly, in the UK, the Peter Mandelson story.
Right. A former top British official, Lord Mandelson, was arrested in connection with the Jeffrey Epstein files.
That ghost just keeps haunting powerful people everywhere.
It really does. And timing-wise, it just adds to the sense of political instability and distraction in the UK, right at the exact moment when the government is grappling with the U.S. base request and the Chagos Islands fallout. It severely weakens the leadership's focus.
And finally, let's check in on the UN. The Security Council is meeting right now. The UK actually holds the rotating presidency this month. What are they officially talking about?
Officially. The agenda is focused on Sudan, specifically violence against women there, and Gaza, discussing the implementation of the comprehensive plan.
But the elephant in the room has to be the Gulf, right?
Absolutely. The U.S.-Iran crisis is looming over every conversation in that building. The Security Council schedule vaguely mentions discussions on threats to international peace and security. And in UN circles, that is just diplomatic code for we urgently need to talk about what the U.S. and Iran are about to do.
But realistically, with the U.S. holding a veto and Russia holding a veto, what can they even do?
Expect total gridlock. The UN is highly likely to just be a paralyzed spectator in this next phase of history.
So let's try to synthesize all of this for the listener. We have covered a lot of ground today. We have a U.S. military buildup in the Middle East that honestly rivals the 2003 Iraq invasion in scale, 2 carrier strike groups, a president giving a very specific 10-day window for military action. But unlike 2003, we do not have a coalition of the willing this time.
Right.
We have the UK actively saying no to using their bases. We have France ghosting our ambassador over a tweet.
And we have an economic war running entirely parallel to the military one. The Section 122 tariffs mean the U.S. is effectively putting a 15% surcharge on the global economy for the next 150 days. It is a high-stakes gamble on every conceivable level.
And look at the adversary in this situation. Iran isn't just sitting there waiting to be bombed. They are severely wounded domestically, 40 million protesters, a crumbling economy. But they are armed with brand new Russian missiles designed specifically to bleed a U.S. ground operation.
That is the absolute key dynamic here. The U.S. is attempting to project overwhelming strength across the board. The massive armada, the blanket tariffs, the hardline ultimatums. But projecting strength requires leverage.
Right.
And the Supreme Court just took away a huge chunk of the president's economic leverage with the IEPA ruling. The traditional allies are taking away diplomatic and logistical leverage. So the U.S. is finding itself relying almost entirely on hard, blunt military power.
And Iran is relying entirely on asymmetry. Their strategy is just, we don't have to beat your supercarriers, we just have to shoot down a few of your helicopters and outlast your political will back home.
Exactly, and Russia is standing right behind them, providing the weapons, not out of some deep loyalty, but because they desperately need Iran to survive so their own economy can survive the sanctions.
It's a house of cards. A very complex, very dangerous, nuclear-armed house of cards.
It really makes you step back and question what the word alliance even means in 2026.
And that is exactly the provocative thought I want to leave you, the listener, with today. We all kind of grew up in a world where the West was a solid, dependable bloc. We had shared values, shared defense, NATO, all of that. But look at the map we just drew for you today.
Fractured.
Russia is protecting Iran just to save its own trade routes. The UK is blocking the US to protect its own sovereignty and disagreeing on strategy. The US is taxing everyone, including allies, just to balance its own payments.
Everyone is operating on pure, unadulterated survival instincts right now.
Exactly. In 2026, it really seems the lines between ally and adversary are being redrawn, not by shared democratic values, but by who needs whom to survive the next 10 days. The window is closing, and we will know very soon if this massive multi-front gamble pays off.
Indeed we will. It's going to be a tense week.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive. We will be watching the ticker nonstop. You should too. Stay safe out there.